everyone, it's Lisa Ross, though you may know me better as Paper Daisy Creations, and I am so excited to teach you how to make these little dots in your knitting by using a technique called German short rows. Basically, what we're doing to create these little dots is knitting back and forth across the row before moving on with the rest of the row. There is a step that you work on the right side with these 7 stitches in which we're going to do some setup German short rows. And then when we come back on the wrong side, we're going to finish those little dots. Now, I use this technique in several designs. This one is called Sunspotter. And so in this design, I called them sunspots. This design is called Islands in the Stream, and so in this design I call them the little islands. I like to think of these little black dots as islands in this stream that curves along. Now all we've done here is create a garter ridge in the blue in between the 2 sets of sunspots, but because of the nature of the sunspots, they cause that line to become wavy and work its way down the stream. All right, let's get started. You can see I've got a little swatch here with some worsted weight yarn. I've used a dark brown paired with a light blue so that you can easily see my stitches. I've got my red markers in place. If your pattern is telling you to place a marker, be sure you do that. I find that markers are incredibly helpful at keeping your stitches straight. And there should be 7 stitches between each set of those markers with some on either end, with some stitches on either end. The blue for this example is where I'm going to be working my islands or sunspots as they may be. And essentially what we're going to do is work across the right side row, working a small set of short rows. So we'll work across, back across the island, and then all the way over to the next one and do the same for that right side row. When I come to the wrong side row over here, I'm going to work a few more sets of short rows, and that's going to give me this lovely dot effect. It's going to cause the garter ridges in between to become wavy, and it gets a really neat effect all by knitting just one color at a time. All right, I'm ready to begin with my light blue yarn, and I'm going to work over to that first stitch marker. Now, I always like to carry my yarn on the second stitch of the row. So I go into that second stitch, cross over the yarn that I'm not using, and then I knit with the yarn that I am using. And that's just going to trap my yarn on the wrong side, not too close to the edge, so that I can avoid those ugly loops that sometimes form if I don't carry it. All right, I'm ready to work my first set of short rows. So in your instructions, this is going to be called Island RS, Island right side, or Sunspot RS, Sunspot right side, or whatever pattern name I might have called it for that design. Across these 7 stitches, I'm actually only going to be working the first 6. So I'm going to knit 6, okay, there's still 1 stitch before the marker if you have your markers placed. And then I'm going to turn my work. I turn the whole thing, no matter how large that shawl is. I'm ready to work on the wrong side row. Now, that first stitch has to become a double stitch. And here's how I do it. Pull the working yarn to the front of your work. Go into that stitch purlwise and take it off the left needle. Then take the yarn, the working yarn, and go up and over your knitting. And that creates this double bar. And in this case, that double bar is brown. In some cases, it may be blue. Now, I've worked my double stitch. Now I'm ready to purl 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I turn my work. And I'm going to do another German short row. And I'm going to do it the same way, making sure that the yarn is in the front of my work. I slip that first stitch purlwise off the left needle. And then I take the working yarn and pull it up and over the knitting. And you'll see there should be 2 light blue bars right there, or whatever color you're knitting. I put the yarn behind the work because I'm going to knit, and this time I'm knitting 5. 1, 2, 3. When I come to this 4th stitch, you'll see it's got that double bar. I have to treat this as a single stitch, but I know that it's not a normal stitch because of the way it's positioned here. That doesn't look like a typical knit stitch, and I know that that's my double stitch. So when I come to that stitch, I have to go into it as if it is a single stitch, and I knit it as if it is a single stitch. Then I knit one more. I slip my marker. I'm going to knit 7 to get over to the next marker. And I can check my knitting if you have a set of sunspots or islands and you are doing a staggered one. You can make sure that it is your plain stitches are right above the previous island or sunspot. I slip my marker, and now I'm going to work that island RS, sunspot RS, or whatever it may be called. So I'm going to knit 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I take my work and I turn it to the back. I'm ready to work my first double stitch. So keep the yarn in the front of your work, put the right tip in purlwise, slip it off the left needle, and then take the yarn and pull it up and over the right needle until you have that double bar or your double stitch. My yarn is now positioned to purl, so I'm going to purl 1, 2, 3, 4. I turn back to the right side. I go in, I hold the yarn to the front, put the right needle into the stitch, pull it off the left needle, and then I take the yarn and go up and over to create a double bar or a double stitch. Now I'm going to knit 5, 1, 2, 3. Once again, I come up to this doubled stitch. I can tell it doesn't look normal. I know that I have to treat my double stitch as a single stitch. So I'm going to go under both of those bars, and I'm going to knit that stitch. That's 4 and 5. And now I'm to the end of my island RS or island right side, and I'm going to work my way to the end following the pattern instructions, making sure to work a decrease at the end if it calls for it. At the end of the right side row, there should be 7 stitches in between each set of markers. Now, keep in mind that one of those stitches in your sunspot or your island, whatever you're calling that little dot, it is a doubled stitch. So if you're looking at the right side from the marker, it should be 1 regular stitch, 1 doubled stitch, and then you have 5 more regular stitches between the markers. Let's work our wrong side row. I'm going to begin my edge stitches, and I actually don't work a sunspot or an island on that first set. So I'm going to purl my way across to the next marker. And then I'm going to work my island WS instructions, or whichever instructions have the WS for wrong side after them. So for this, I'm going to purl 7. So I'm actually purling all the way to the marker, and you'll see that that 6th stitch is a doubled stitch. So I'm going to purl 7. And remember, when you come to that doubled stitch, which for me is the 6th stitch, I have to purl it as if it's a single stitch. So you may or may not see those 2 bars right there. They kind of climb on top of each other. Go under those 2 bars and purl that stitch. So I've worked purl 7. I'm to my marker. I turn my work, and I'm going to work my double stitch. So I hold the yarn to the front. I slip that stitch purlwise off the left needle. I take the yarn and I pull it up and over, and I kind of give it an extra tug to make those 2 bars appear. I also want it to be nice and snug, and the reason we do this double stitch is to prevent a hole from appearing. If I just turned and knit across the right side here, I would end up with a hole right there, and this prevents that from happening. So now I'm going to knit 6. And again, that brings me right to my marker. I turn my work, I hold the yarn to the front, slip that stitch off purlwise with the right needle, pull it off the left needle, and I take the yarn and I pull it up and over to create those 2 bars. And you'll notice, depending on if you're working on the knit side or the purl side, that double stitch may look a little bit different depending on which side you're on. Now I'm going to work up to that doubled stitch by purling 5. So I'm not working the doubled stitch. I come to 1 stitch before it, and then I turn, keep the yarn in front, and I'm going to slip that stitch off and go up and over. And this time I'm going to knit 4. And then I turn. And so what we did here, I always say it to myself as I'm doing it, that I'm going to purl 7, knit 6, purl 5, knit 4. So it's 7, 6, 5, 4, and that those numbers gradually decrease. So I'm going to pull that stitch off with the yarn held in front, and I pull it up and over to make my final doubled stitch. Then it tells me to purl to the marker. So I'm purling 5 to get to the marker, and 2 of those stitches are doubled stitches. So I just have to remember to purl them as if they're a single stitch by going under both bars. So I'm going to go into that hole. You'll see the 2 bars kind of show up on my needle, or depending on how you're holding the stitch. I purl that, go into the next one and purl it. Then I'm going to go ahead and purl 7 to my next marker. Oops. I slip the marker off. Okay, and now I'm going to be purling to my next marker. I'm going to work that doubled stitch as a single stitch because there should only be 7 stitches between here. And it's going to be purl 7, knit 6, purl 5, knit 4, and I have to remember to work those doubled stitches in between. So I'm going to purl 7, I work that doubled stitch, I turn, so I'm at the marker, I turn my work, I pull that yarn to the front, slip the stitch off, and go up and over, and I'm ready to work the knit stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which gets me to my marker. I turn. This is where I bring the yarn to the front, go in purlwise, take it off the needle, up and over, purl 5, turn, I go into that stitch with the yarn held in front, take it off purlwise, up and over, and I knit 4. And the more you do these, the quicker it'll get, working all the way across your line of sunspots or islands. I'm going to go in, pull that up and over, and that is it for my sunspots on this row. Now I am going to show you what it looks like with the next row, which is just going to be my garter ridge, but I want to show you how we do that and just remind you that anywhere you have those doubled stitches, you have to treat them as a single stitch. So it can be helpful as you're working the pattern to count the stitches, because you should have 7 between every set of markers. So you should have 7 stitches between every set of markers. That does not change for the entire pattern. So I'm ready to work my brown. And just like I did before, I'm going to carry the yarn I'm not using. So I go into the second stitch, cross the yarn that I'm not using over the working yarn, and knit with the working yarn. All right, I slip my marker, and then I'm knitting across with the brown. When I come to these doubled stitches, you can see they are not normal looking stitches. You have to go right next to your needle under those bars and knit that stitch as if it were a single stitch. Okay. And again, I find it helpful if you are not recognizing those stitches to count, because it will be stitches 6 and 7. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm to my 6th stitch. That doesn't look right. Do not go into these bars. You have to go under as if you're knitting the entire stitch, that entire doubled stitch. That was my 6 and 7. And then I can go to the end of my row. It is a great idea to spot check your work and make sure that your sunspots or islands are lining up correctly. They may look a little wonky while they're on the needles, but as the time goes on, you'll get to see that beautiful patterning emerge. Your garter ridges will just flow around your islands, and you will be all set. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Lisa Ross. You can find all of my patterns on Ravelry and paperdaisycreations.com, and I wish you all very happy knitting.